Blood pooled beneath Eleanor Ramirez's trembling body as she lay in the dirt of Abilene, Texas, the setting sun painting the sky crimson, a cruel mirror to her fate. Her swollen eyes could barely make out the silhouettes of her attackers as they disappeared down the dusty street, their laughter fading into the approaching dusk of that fateful summer evening in 1875. Eleanor's fingers clawed weakly at the ground, her torn dress offering little protection against the cooling air. At 22, she had never imagined dying alone in the dirt of a town that was supposed to represent a fresh start. The beating had come swiftly retribution, they had said, for speaking out against the cattle baron who'd been forcing local farmers off their land. "Sweet Jesus," came a deep voice from above her, through her one good eye. She could make out the tall figure of a man backlit by the fading sunlight. "Miss, can you hear me?" She tried to speak, but only a wet cough escaped her lips, speckling the dust with crimson droplets. "Don't try to talk," the man said, crouching beside her. She flinched as his hand approached her face. "I ain't gonna hurt you, miss. Name's Ryder Zachary. I'm gonna help you if you'll let me." Eleanor wanted to resist when he slid his arms beneath her broken body, but she had no strength left. The pain as he lifted her was blinding, and merciful darkness claimed her consciousness. When she awakened, it was to the unfamiliar sensation of a soft mattress beneath her and the scent of coffee and pine. The room was small but tidy, a cabin of some sort, with a potbelly stove radiating warmth. Every breath sent shards of pain through her ribs, and when she tried to move, she discovered her left arm was tightly bandaged. "Easy now," came that same deep voice. The man Ryder, she remembered, moved into her field of vision. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps no more than 28, with weathered skin that spoke of long days under the Texas sun. His brown hair fell in waves to his collar, and his eyes, a startling blue, watched her with concern. "Where am I?" Eleanor managed, her voice a rasp. "My cabin, about 2 miles outside Abilene," he said, pouring water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "Couldn't take you to town. Whoever did this might come looking to finish the job." He approached cautiously, like she was a wounded animal that might bolt. "Can you drink?" With his help, Eleanor managed a few sips. The cool water was heaven on her parched throat. As awareness returned, so did the memory of hands striking her, boots connecting with her ribs, the cruel faces of men who worked for Harold Stanton, the cattle baron who'd been terrorizing the region. "They'll kill me," she whispered, panic rising in her chest. "No, they won't," Ryder said, his voice hard with certainty. "You're safe here. I promise you that." Eleanor studied him through her swollen eyes. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. A gun belt hung from a peg near the door, the worn handle of his revolver speaking of frequent use. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're the schoolteacher who came to Abilene 3 months back. I know you've been speaking out against Stanton at town meetings. And I know nobody deserves what was done to you." She tried to sit up and gasped as pain lanced through her side. "Careful now," Ryder said, gently easing her back down. "You've got 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder I had to put back, and more cuts and bruises than I care to count. That gash on your arm needed 15 stitches. Eleanor looked down at her bandaged arm. "You did this?" He nodded, a hint of embarrassment crossing his features. "Learned field medicine during the war. Not pretty work, but it'll hold." He paused. "Can you tell me your name, miss? Seems only fair since I brought you to my home." "Eleanor," she said after a moment. "Eleanor Ramirez." "Spanish?" he asked, surprise evident in his tone as he looked at her fair skin. "My husband was," she replied, then corrected herself. "My late husband." Understanding flickered in Ryder's eyes, but he didn't press for details. "Rest now, Miss Ramirez. We can talk more when you're stronger." Over the next few days, Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she woke, Ryder was there, sometimes reading by lamplight, sometimes cleaning his guns, but always alert. He changed her bandages with gentle hands, his touch clinical but respectful. He fed her broth and helped her drink, never commenting on her weakness or dependence. On the fourth day, she finally managed to stay awake for more than a few minutes at a time. The cabin, she discovered, was a simple one-room affair with a small lean-to addition that Ryder explained served as his washroom. The main space held a table with 2 chairs, the bed she occupied, a chest of drawers, and a small bookshelf surprisingly well stocked with volumes. "Where do you sleep?" she asked, suddenly realizing she'd taken his only bed. Ryder nodded toward a bedroll near the stove. "I've slept in worse places." Guilt washed over her. "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will, at least until you're healed," he said, his tone brooking no argument. He sat in the chair beside the bed, pushing a plate of beans and cornbread toward her. "Think you can manage solid food today?" The simple meal was the most delicious thing Eleanor had tasted in days. As she ate, Ryder studied her with those piercing blue eyes. "I need to ask you something," he said finally. "Those men who attacked you, they were Stanton's men, weren't they?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "3 of them. They caught me walking home from school. Said I needed to learn to keep my mouth shut about matters that didn't concern me." Her hand trembled as she set down her fork. "I've been organizing the farmers, helping them stand together against Stanton's land grabs. He's been using intimidation, threats, even burning out those who won't sell." "I know," Ryder said quietly. "Stanton's been pushing smaller ranchers too, cutting off water access, running off cattle." "You have a ranch?" she asked, suddenly curious about this man who had saved her. A shadow crossed his face. "Had one. Small spread about 10 miles north. Stanton's men burned my house and barn last winter. I was lucky to get my horses out." His jaw tightened. "Been working odd jobs since, saving up to rebuild." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, understanding his motivation for helping her now. "So you've been fighting him too?" "In my way," Ryder acknowledged, "but not as openly as you have, Miss Ramirez." "Eleanor," she corrected, "after what you've done for me, I think we can dispense with formalities." A small smile touched his lips. "Eleanor, then." That evening, as the pain in her ribs eased enough to allow for conversation, Eleanor told Ryder about coming to Abilene after her husband Miguel died of tuberculosis in San Antonio. She'd taken the teaching position hoping for a fresh start, only to find herself in the middle of a range war between Stanton and the smaller landholders. "Miguel taught me that there are things worth fighting for," she said, staring into the flames of the stove. "He was always standing up for the workers at the rail yard. I guess some of that rubbed off on me." Ryder listened quietly, turning a tin cup in his hands. "Your husband sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Eleanor agreed. "We only had 2 years together before the sickness took him." She looked up at Ryder. "What about you? No wife waiting somewhere?" He shook his head. "Never found the right time. Or the right woman, I suppose. The war took 6 years of my life, and then I was building the ranch. Now." He gestured around the sparse cabin. As night fell, Eleanor watched Ryder prepare for sleep, moving with the efficient economy of a man accustomed to solitude. He banked the fire in the stove, checked the locks on the doors and windows, and finally settled onto his bedroll with a worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans. "Ryder," she said softly into the darkening room. He looked up from his book. "Yes? Thank you. For everything." He nodded once, his face half hidden in shadow. "Get some rest, Eleanor. Tomorrow will be better." In the days that followed, Eleanor's strength gradually returned. Ryder helped her take short walks outside the cabin, his arm steady beneath her hand as she navigated the uneven ground. The cabin, she discovered, was nestled in a small clearing surrounded by cottonwoods, with a creek bubbling nearby, and a corral holding 3 horses, a sturdy bay gelding, a dappled mare, and a spirited-looking black stallion. "That's Thunder," Ryder explained, nodding toward the black horse who watched them with intelligent eyes. "Ornery as they come, but the fastest horse I've ever ridden. Saved my life more than once." "They're beautiful," Eleanor said, breathing in the fresh air that smelled of pine and wildflowers. After being confined to the cabin, even this short excursion felt like freedom. On the 10th day after her rescue, while Ryder was chopping wood outside, Eleanor found herself examining the few personal items in his cabin. A tintype photograph on his shelf caught her eye, a younger Ryder in a Confederate uniform standing beside an older man with the same striking blue eyes. "My father," came Ryder's voice from the doorway. Eleanor startled, nearly dropping the photo. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." "I shouldn't have been prying," she said, carefully replacing the photograph. Ryder shrugged, setting down an armful of firewood. "Not much to pry into. That was taken before Shiloh. My father didn't come home from that battle." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, meaning it. She had seen that same grief in too many eyes during and after the war. "Long time ago now," he said, though the tightness around his eyes suggested the wound wasn't as healed as he pretended. "War's over. Just men trying to live now." That evening, as they shared a rabbit stew Ryder had prepared, he broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "You're healing well," he said, watching her over the rim of his cup. "Soon you'll be well enough to travel." Eleanor felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with her injuries. The thought of returning to Abilene, of facing Stanton's men again, sent a wave of fear through her. "I don't know if I can go back," she admitted. "They meant to kill me, Ryder. If you hadn't found me—" "I wasn't suggesting you go back to town," he said quickly. "That would be foolish. But you can't stay here indefinitely either." He hesitated. "I've been thinking. My sister lives in Denver with her husband. She could help you get settled there, find work. It's far enough that Stanton's reach wouldn't extend to you." The suggestion made perfect sense, yet Eleanor felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "You want me to leave Texas?" "I want you to be safe," Ryder said, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "And you won't be. Not anywhere near Abilene, not as long as Stanton has power here." Eleanor stared down at her bowl, emotions warring within her. The practical part of her knew he was right. Yet something else, something she wasn't quite ready to examine, made the thought of leaving this cabin, of leaving Ryder, surprisingly painful. "I need time to think," she said finally. That night, sleep eluded Eleanor. From her bed she could see Ryder's silhouette as he slept on his bedroll, his breathing deep and even. In the short time she had known him, she had come to rely on his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of justice. The thought of never seeing him again after she left for Denver created an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her healing ribs. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Eleanor was washing dishes when she heard horses approaching. Ryder immediately reached for his rifle, his body tense. "Stay inside," he ordered, moving to the window. After a moment, his shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's Caleb Johnson and his boy. Friendly," he added for her benefit. Eleanor watched from the doorway as Ryder greeted a weather-beaten man in his 50s and a younger man who bore a strong resemblance to him. They spoke in low voices, with frequent glances toward the cabin. Finally, Ryder nodded and the visitors departed. "What was that about?" Eleanor asked as he returned. "News from town," Ryder said grimly. "Stanton's been telling folks you stole money from the school funds before you disappeared. He's offering a reward for information on your whereabouts." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "That's absurd. I would never—" "I know," Ryder cut her off. "So does anyone with sense, but it gives Stanton's men an excuse to search for you." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his agitation. "There's more. The Johnsons' neighbor, Franklin, refused to sell his land to Stanton last week. Yesterday they found him beaten nearly to death in his barn." Eleanor sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "Will he live?" "Caleb doesn't think so. And neither does the doctor." Ryder's eyes were hard with anger. "This has to end, Eleanor. Stanton can't keep terrorizing the county." "What can we do?" she asked quietly. Ryder paced the small cabin. "There's a circuit judge coming through next week. If we could gather enough testimony from Stanton's victims, present evidence of his crimes—" "His men would kill anyone who spoke against him," Eleanor said. "You know that." "Not if enough people stand together," Ryder countered. "1 or 2 farmers, yes, but what if 20 came forward? 30? Stanton can't silence everyone." Eleanor watched him, recognizing the same fire that had burned in Miguel. It would be dangerous. Staying silent is dangerous too, he said. Ask Franklin. Ask yourself. His eyes softened as they met hers. I'm not asking you to be part of this. You've suffered enough, but I can't stand by anymore. That night, Eleanor lay awake long after Ryder had fallen asleep. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of fear, anger, and an unexpected determination. She had come to Abilene to build a new life after Miguel's death. Instead, she had found corruption and cruelty, but also courage and kindness in the form of the man sleeping across the room. By morning, her decision was made. When Ryder rose, she was already up, making coffee. I'm staying, she said without preamble. Ryder paused in the act of pulling on his boots. What? I'm not running to Denver, Eleanor clarified, meeting his gaze steadily. I'm going to help you gather testimonies against Stanton. The children I taught have parents who've suffered under his reign. They know me. They'll talk to me. Eleanor, no. Ryder stood, his expression alarmed. If Stanton's men find you, they think I'm dead or gone, she interrupted, and they won't be looking for a Mexican woman. At his confused look, she smiled grimly. I lived as one for 2 years with Miguel's family. I can darken my hair, wear different clothes. No one will recognize me. It's too dangerous, Ryder insisted, but she could see a flicker of consideration in his eyes. More dangerous than letting Stanton continue, she challenged. You said it yourself, we need enough people to stand together. Let me help you build that coalition, Ryder. They argued for hours, but in the end, Ryder reluctantly agreed to her plan. They would begin with the Johnsons, then approach other farmers and small ranchers who had suffered under Stanton's tactics. Eleanor would disguise herself as a Mexican widow, speaking to the women while Ryder talked to the men. As they formulated their strategy, Eleanor found herself studying Ryder's face, the determined set of his jaw, the intelligence in his blue eyes, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. Something warm unfurled in her chest, something she had not felt since Miguel's death. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. The next day, they put their plan into action. Using coffee grounds and walnut dye, Eleanor darkened her hair to nearly black. She donned a simple dress Ryder had procured from the Johnson family, along with a black shawl and a wedding band that had belonged to Mrs. Johnson's mother. How do I look? She asked, turning to Ryder after completing her transformation. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Different, he finally said. But your eyes are the same. I'll keep them downcast like a proper widow, she promised. They rode double on Thunder, Eleanor seated behind Ryder with her arms around his waist. The physical contact sent an unexpected thrill through her, and she was glad he couldn't see her face. Their first stop was the Johnson farm, where they were welcomed into the kitchen with hot coffee and fresh bread. Mrs. Johnson, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, immediately took to Eleanor, while Caleb and his son listened intently as Ryder outlined their plan. It's about time someone stood up to that snake, Caleb said, his weathered hands clenched on the table. Franklin was the third man this year to end up beaten or worse for crossing Stanton. We need more than just talk, Ryder said. We need written statements, details of threats, damage, intimidation, anything that shows a pattern. You'll get it, Caleb promised. I can name 10 families right now who'd be willing to speak up if they knew others were doing the same. By the end of the day, they had visited 3 more farms, gathering stories that made Eleanor's blood boil: crops destroyed, water sources diverted, livestock mysteriously killed, and always the threats, explicit or implied. Each family agreed to provide written testimony and to attend a meeting Ryder proposed for the following week. As they rode back to the cabin in the gathering dusk, Eleanor felt simultaneously exhausted and invigorated. People are ready to fight back, she said, her arms still around Ryder's waist. They just needed someone to lead the way. Someone like you mean, Ryder said over his shoulder, his voice warm with approval. You were remarkable today. The way you got those women talking. Eleanor blushed at his praise. They needed someone to listen. Sometimes that's all people really want. That night, as they ate a simple supper of beans and cornbread, their conversation flowed more easily than ever before. They discovered a shared love of literature, a mutual dislike of politicians, and a common belief that the war had solved too little while costing too much. Miguel used to say that men fight wars, but women heal the wounds afterward, Eleanor remarked, staring into the flames of the stove. I didn't understand what he meant until after he died. The healing is harder than the fighting, in some ways. Ryder's eyes met hers across the table. Your husband was a wise man. Yes, she agreed softly. He would have liked you, I think. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Later, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she caught Ryder watching her with an expression that made her heart quicken. There was tenderness there, and something more, something neither of them was ready to name. The next 5 days passed in a blur of activity as they traveled to farms and small ranches throughout the county. By day, they gathered testimonies and built support for their confrontation with Stanton. By night, they returned to the cabin, where their conversations stretched later and their comfortable silences grew more charged with unspoken feelings. On the 6th day, disaster struck. They were returning from the Petersons' farm when Ryder suddenly pulled Thunder to a halt, his body tense. Riders, he said quietly, nodding toward a dust cloud in the distance, coming from the direction of the cabin. Eleanor's heart raced. Stanton's men? Can't tell yet, but we can't take chances, Ryder said, turning Thunder off the trail and into a grove of cottonwoods. We'll circle around, approach from the back. They dismounted in a dense thicket a quarter-mile from the cabin. Ryder retrieved his rifle from its scabbard, checking it with practiced hands. Stay here with Thunder, he instructed. If you hear shooting, ride for the Johnsons' place. Don't wait for me. Eleanor grabbed his arm as he turned to go. Be careful, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes softened as he looked down at her. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently touched her cheek. I will. Crouched in the thicket. Eleanor counted the minutes of Ryder's absence, her heart thundering in her chest. The thought of losing him, this man who had saved her life, who had become so important to her in such a short time, was unbearable. When Ryder returned 30 minutes later, his expression was grim. They've been through the cabin, tore the place apart. Who? Eleanor asked, relief at his safe return quickly giving way to fear. Stanton's men. 3 of them, he said, jaw tight with anger. They found your blood-stained dress. They know someone's been staying with me. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Do they know it's me? Don't think so, but they'll be watching the cabin now. He ran a hand through his hair. We can't go back there. What do we do? She asked, fighting to keep panic at bay. Ryder's eyes met hers, determination replacing anger. We move up our timeline. The meeting was set for 2 days from now. We need to gather everyone tonight. As dusk fell, riders began arriving at the abandoned mill 3 miles outside, town farmers, small ranchers, shopkeepers who had suffered under Stanton's tactics. Ryder and Eleanor had spent the afternoon sending word through trusted allies, and now nearly 40 people crowded into the dusty space, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. Ryder stood on a crate, his presence commanding attention without him having to raise his voice. You all know why we're here, he began. Harold Stanton has been terrorizing this county for too long. He's driven good people off their land, destroyed livelihoods, and now he's escalated to murder. A murmur ran through the crowd at this. Franklin Miller died this morning, Ryder continued, his voice hard. That makes 3 deaths we can lay at Stanton's feet, 3 too many. From her position at the edge of the gathering, Eleanor watched as Ryder united the disparate group with his quiet authority and clear vision. He outlined their plan to present their evidence to the circuit judge, to demand an investigation, and if necessary to form a protective association to defend their lands and livelihoods. We need to stand together, he concluded. Alone, we're vulnerable. Together, we have a chance. As the meeting progressed, Eleanor circulated among the women, gathering additional testimonies and offering reassurance. More than once, she caught Ryder's eyes following her through the crowd, a warmth in his gaze that made her cheeks flush. They were preparing to depart when a young boy burst into the mill, his face pale with fear. "Ryder's coming," he gasped. "Lots of them." Chaos erupted as people rushed toward the doors. Ryder's voice cut through the panic. "Everyone calm down. Johnson, Peterson, get the women and children out the back. Thomas, Wilson, bring your rifles to the front. The rest of you clear out now. No sense in all of us being caught here." Eleanor pushed against the tide of bodies toward Ryder. "I'm not leaving you," she said when she reached his side. "Eleanor," he began, but the sound of the horses outside cut him off. "Zachary," a booming voice called from outside. "I know you're in there. Come out now and nobody gets hurt." Ryder's face hardened. "That's Stanton himself," he said quietly to the handful of armed men who had remained. "Stay calm. Let me do the talking." Eleanor's heart hammered as Ryder stepped through the door, his rifle held non-threateningly at his side. She moved to a window, peering out at the scene unfolding in the mill yard. Harold Stanton sat atop a massive chestnut stallion, surrounded by at least a dozen armed men. In his 50s, with silver threading his dark hair and a thick mustache covering his upper lip, Stanton exuded arrogance and power. "Zachary," he greeted Ryder with mocking cordiality, "having a little social gathering without inviting me? I'm hurt." "This is private property, Stanton," Ryder replied evenly. "You're trespassing." Stanton laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Funny coming from a man who's been harboring a thief and a troublemaker." His eyes narrowed. "Where is she, Zachary? The schoolteacher who stole from this town's children." "I don't know what you're talking about," Ryder said, his voice betraying nothing. "Don't insult my intelligence," Stanton snapped. "My men found evidence at your cabin. The woman's alive and you've been hiding her." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Hand her over, and maybe I'll forget about your part in this little conspiracy you've been organizing." Ryder's stance remained casual, but Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders. "There's no conspiracy, Stanton, just citizens tired of being bullied off their land." "Is that what you call it?" Stanton's voice hardened. "I call it progress. This county needs a strong hand to develop it properly, not a bunch of dirt farmers scratching out pathetic livings." "That strong hand has put 3 men in the ground," Ryder countered. "The circuit judge might be interested in hearing about that." A dangerous smile spread across Stanton's face. "Judge Carlton, old friend of mine. Had dinner with him just last night, in fact." He shook his head. "You really think the law in this county isn't already in my pocket, Zachary?" From her vantage point, Eleanor could see Ryder's companions exchanging worried glances. If the judge was corrupted, their entire plan was in jeopardy. "You have 1 minute to produce the schoolteacher," Stanton continued. "After that, we burn this place to the ground, with or without you in it." Eleanor's mind raced. If she surrendered herself, Stanton would almost certainly kill her, but he might spare Ryder and the others. If she didn't, people might die in the confrontation that was clearly imminent. Her decision was made in an instant. Drawing her shawl over her head, she slipped out the back door and circled around to approach from the side of the mill yard. Her heart pounded, but her steps were steady as she walked into view. "I'm here, Stanton," she called, her voice carrying across the tense tableau. Every head turned toward her. She had washed the walnut dye from her hair that morning, and now she stood revealed as herself, Eleanor Ramirez, schoolteacher and widow. "Eleanor, no!" Ryder's anguished cry cut through the sudden silence. Stanton's eyes narrowed as he studied her. "Well, well, the missing schoolmarm returns." He nodded to 2 of his men. "Bring her here." As the men dismounted and moved toward her, Ryder stepped into their path, his rifle now raised. "Touch her, and you die," he said, his voice deadly quiet. The standoff crystallized in that moment, Ryder and his few armed companions against Stanton's superior numbers. Eleanor could see the calculation in Stanton's eyes, weighing the cost of a gunfight against his desire for vengeance. You're outnumbered, Zachary, Stanton said finally. Is this woman really worth dying for? Yes, Ryder answered without hesitation, his eyes never leaving the cattle baron's face. But the question you should be asking is whether she's worth you dying for. Because if your men take one step closer, you'll be the first one I shoot. The conviction in his voice must have registered with Stanton, whose smile faltered slightly. Before he could respond, the thunder of approaching hooves drew everyone's attention to the road. Riders appeared, dozens of them, men from the meeting who had apparently rallied instead of fleeing. They surrounded the mill yard, effectively cutting off Stanton's escape. At their head rode Caleb Johnson, his rifle trained on Stanton. Seems the numbers have changed, Ryder observed, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Fury distorted Stanton's features as he looked around at the assembled farmers and ranchers. You're making a mistake, he snarled. All of you, this isn't over. Actually, it is, came a new voice. A tall man in a dark suit rode into the clearing, flanked by 4 armed men wearing badges. Harold Stanton, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Franklin Miller and conspiracy to commit numerous other crimes. Eleanor watched in disbelief as the newcomer produced a federal marshal's badge. Who? She whispered. Marshal James Parker, Ryder supplied quietly, having moved to her side. I sent a telegram to the federal authorities in Austin 3 days ago. Didn't think they'd respond this quickly. As Stanton and his men were disarmed and arrested, the tension in the yard gradually dissipated. The marshal approached Ryder and Eleanor, his expression grave. Mr. Zachary, he greeted Ryder with a nod. Your telegram outlined some serious allegations. We'll need statements from everyone who suffered under Stanton's reign. You'll get them, Ryder promised. More than enough to put him away for good. The marshal's eyes shifted to Eleanor. And you must be the schoolteacher I've heard about. Brave thing you did, standing up to a man like Stanton. She's the bravest person I know, Ryder said, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. As the crowd dispersed and Stanton's men were led away, Eleanor found herself trembling not with fear, but with the aftermath of tension and the sudden realization that it was over. Their plan had succeeded, though not in the way they had anticipated. Are you all right? Ryder asked, his concerned gaze searching her face. I am now, she said, offering him a shaky smile. I can't believe it worked. I can't believe you walked out there, he countered, a hint of reproach in his voice. What were you thinking? I was thinking I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me, Eleanor admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Something shifted in Ryder's expression, the careful restraint he had maintained giving way to raw emotion. Without warning, he pulled her into his arms, his embrace gentle despite its urgency. Don't ever do that again, he murmured against her hair. I thought my heart would stop when I saw you walk out there. Eleanor closed her eyes, savoring the solid strength of him, the steadiness of his heartbeat against her cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered, but I'm not sorry for trying to protect you, just as you protected me. Ryder drew back slightly, his hands coming up to frame her face. Eleanor, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I think I'm falling in love with you. The words sent a jolt through her, a mixture of joy and fear. Ryder, she began, uncertain how to respond. You don't have to say anything, he said quickly. It's too soon, I know that, after what you've been through, after losing your husband. I just needed you to know. Eleanor reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. It's not too soon, she said softly. I feel it too. I've been fighting it because it frightened me how quickly you became important to me. Relief and happiness transformed Ryder's face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Eleanor responded, rising on her toes to deepen the contact, Ryder's arms tightened around her. Drawing her more fully against him, time seemed to stop as they stood there in the fading light, discovering each other in this new way. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. Come home with me? He asked, the question layered with meaning. Eleanor nodded, her heart too full for words. In the weeks that followed, justice moved swiftly through Abilene. Marshall Parker's investigation uncovered evidence of corruption that extended to the county sheriff and several officials. Stanton and his key men were transported to Austin to stand trial for murder, extortion, and a host of other crimes. With the threat removed, farmers and ranchers began the process of rebuilding what had been damaged or destroyed. Eleanor returned to her teaching position, welcomed back by parents who had never believed Stanton's accusations. By day, she taught the children of Abilene. By evening, she returned to Ryder's cabin, which had increasingly become their shared home. Together, they repaired the damage Stanton's men had done to the cabin. They planted a small garden, added a porch where they could sit in the evenings, and began making plans for the future. On a warm evening in early autumn, as they sat on that porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ryder took Eleanor's hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "My land to the north, the ranch that was burned, the soil is still good, the water plentiful. I've saved enough to start rebuilding." Eleanor smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That's wonderful, Ryder. When will you start?" "That depends," he said, his voice taking on an uncharacteristic nervousness. Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I was hoping I wouldn't be building it alone." Eleanor's breath caught as he opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold ring into his palm. It was old, clearly a family piece, with a small diamond that caught the fading sunlight. "This was my mother's," Ryder said softly. "My father gave it to her when they had nothing but dreams in each other." His blue eyes, so familiar and dear to Eleanor now, met hers with vulnerable hope. "Eleanor Ramirez, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life with me, a home, perhaps a family someday?" Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as happiness welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Ryder Zachary, I will marry you." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and protection. They were married 2 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the Johnson farm, surrounded by the friends who had stood with them against Stanton. Eleanor wore a new dress of pale blue with wildflowers in her hair. Ryder, in a new suit that made him look even more handsome than usual, couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. "I, Ryder, take you, Eleanor, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice strong and clear, "to love and to cherish, to protect and to honor all the days of my life." When Eleanor repeated her vows, her voice trembled with emotion. "I, Eleanor, take you, Ryder, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to love and to cherish, to support and to honor all the days of my life." The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and more food than Eleanor had seen in one place since before the war. As Ryder led her in a dance, she marveled at the journey that had brought them together from violence and fear to this moment of perfect joy. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Zachary?" Ryder murmured, his arms secure around her waist as they moved to the music. The new name sent a thrill through her. "About beginnings," she replied. "How sometimes they come from the most unexpected places." His smile was tender as he bent to kiss her, heedless of the cheers and good-natured teasing from their friends. "This is just our first beginning," he promised. "We have a lifetime of them ahead." Winter found them settled in a partially rebuilt ranch house on Ryder's northern property. Though still smaller than his original home, it was warm and solid, with a large fireplace that kept the bitter Texas cold at bay. Eleanor had taken a leave from teaching until spring, devoting herself to making their new home comfortable, while Ryder worked on constructing outbuildings and repairing fences. On Christmas Eve, as snow dusted the Texas landscape in an unusual winter blessing, they sat before the fire, wrapped in a quilt and each other's arms. "I have something to tell you," Eleanor said, a secret smile playing about her lips. Ryder's eyes, blue as the summer sky even in winter's grip, met hers questioningly. "What is it, love?" Taking his hand, she placed it gently on her stomach. "By next Christmas there will be 3 of us to celebrate." Wonder transformed Ryder's face as her meaning registered. "A baby? You're certain?" Eleanor nodded, laughing as he gathered her into a careful embrace, as though she had suddenly become fragile. "The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday. We'll welcome our child in early summer." "A child," Ryder repeated, awe in his voice. He pressed his lips to her forehead, then her mouth, in a kiss that conveyed everything words could not. "I never thought I could be this happy, Eleanor. When I found you that day, beaten and bleeding in the dirt, I never imagined you would become my whole world." "God works in mysterious ways," Eleanor said softly. "What was meant to destroy me instead led me to you, to this life we're building together." As the fire crackled and night deepened outside their windows, Eleanor rested in the security of Ryder's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought her from the brink of death to this moment of profound contentment. The scars of that terrible beating had faded, though they would never completely disappear. But they had been transformed, like everything else in her life, by the love of the man who had stitched her wounds and promised her safety, a promise he had kept in every way that mattered. Their son, William Caleb Zachary, was born on a perfect June morning in 1876, his lusty cries announcing his arrival to a world that seemed full of promise. With his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that hinted at his mother's Spanish heritage by marriage, he was a beautiful combination of both his parents. Ryder, who had paced anxiously throughout Eleanor's labor, held his son with hands that trembled slightly, wonder and love plain on his face. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully returning the infant to Eleanor's arms, just like his mother. As William grew, so did the Zachary ranch. By his first birthday, the main house was completed a sturdy 2-story structure with enough room for the family Ryder and Eleanor hoped to have. The barn housed a growing number of horses and cattle, and the first harvest from Eleanor's expanded garden promised abundance. Life was not without challenges. Drought threatened their second summer, and a group of rustlers targeted area ranches in the winter of 1877. But through it all, Ryder and Eleanor faced each obstacle together, their partnership only strengthening with time. On their second wedding anniversary, as they walked hand in hand along the creek that bordered their property, Eleanor reflected on how far they had come. "Do you ever think about that day," she asked, "when you found me in Abilene?" Ryder's hand tightened around hers. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Usually when I wake in the night and watch you sleeping beside me. I think about how close I came to losing you before I even knew you." Eleanor stopped, turning to face him in the golden late afternoon light. "I used to wonder why I survived when so many others didn't. Now I know." "Why is that?" he asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "So I could find you," she said simply. "So we could build this life together. So William could be born." She smiled up at him, this man who had become her protector, her partner, her love. "So I could know what it means to be truly happy." Ryder's kiss was gentle, a reaffirmation of the vows they had made and kept. Against her lips he murmured, "Here's to a lifetime more of that happiness, Eleanor Zachary. A lifetime more of us." In the years that followed, the Zachary Ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. William was joined by a sister, Emma Rose, in 1878, and another brother, James Miguel, in 1881. Their home rang with children's laughter, with music from Eleanor's piano, a surprise anniversary gift from Ryder, and with the sounds of a family deeply rooted in love and respect. Eleanor eventually returned to teaching, establishing a small school on their property for their children and those of neighboring ranches. Ryder expanded his cattle operation and became known for breeding some of the finest horses in Texas, with Thunder's descendants particularly prized. They never forgot the darkness that had brought them together, the violence of Stanton's reign, the fear that had permeated the county. Instead, they channeled those memories into creating a different kind of community, one built on mutual support and justice. Ryder served 2 terms as county commissioner, while Eleanor organized assistance for families in need and advocated for educational improvements. On a warm evening in 1895, nearly 20 years after Ryder had found Eleanor bleeding in the dirt of Abilene, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. William, now 19, and the image of his father, was preparing to attend university in Austin. Emma, 17, and possessing her mother's quiet strength, was engaged to the son of Caleb Johnson. James, 14 and headstrong, was already showing signs of becoming a gifted rancher. "We've been blessed," Eleanor said softly, her head resting on Ryder's shoulder. At 42, she was still beautiful, though strands of silver now threaded through her dark hair. The lines at the corners of her eyes spoke of years of laughter and occasional sorrow. They had buried her father-in-law and several dear friends over the years. "Beyond measure," Ryder agreed, his arms secure around her waist. At 48, he remained strong and vital, though the years of ranching had etched their mark on his face and hands. "Do you ever regret it? Staying in Texas instead of going to Denver all those years ago?" Eleanor looked up at him, her heart still quickening at the love she saw in his blue eyes, eyes that had not changed since that first day when he had promised her safety and delivered so much more. "Never," she said with absolute certainty, "not for a single moment." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, surrounded by the legacy they had built together, a home, a family, a community transformed by their courage and commitment. From violence had come healing, from hatred, love, from fear, a lifetime of security found in each other's arms. And if sometimes Eleanor's old wounds ached with changing weather, she needed only to look at the life she and Ryder had created to know that some scars were worth bearing, for they marked not just survival, but triumph and the beginning of a love story that would be told in their family for generations to come.